right, we're going to take a change in tack. Rather than talk about the terrible and dangerous divisions in our society at Albert Park, we're going to talk about something more peaceful, nuclear submarines and China and superpower relationships. And to do that, our go-to guy on all things international relations is Robert Patman, who joins us by video link now. Robert, thank you for getting up early to talk to us.
Good morning, Sean.
We got a bit to get through, but first up, Aukus. That's the Australia, United Kingdom, and US, is it? United States?
Yes.
Yeah, United States. Well, defence security arrangement, which involves the Australians upgrading their sub-fleet. So they have now, I want to get this clear, nuclear-powered submarines.
Well, they will have by the 2030s. They have purchased 3 Virginia-class nuclear submarines from the United States, and they'll take delivery of those submarines in the 2030s. They're also involved in receiving additional submarines, which are a project of Aukus, American technology with a British design, and they'll come on stream in the 2050s. So it's quite a long-term enhanced security arrangement between the US, UK and Australia. And of course, it has caused some controversy in Australia, not least because of the cost, because Australia will be spending anything from 268 billion to up to 380 billion on this new project.
That's eye-watering. Nuclear-powered, nuclear-capable, that's the big question I've got, because these submarines are used to deploy nuclear munitions, and it's this cat and mouse game it was during the height of the Cold War, where you had missile submarines that could fire on foreign targets or any target they chose, sneaking around the world. What is the point of Australia having nuclear-powered submarines, and will they potentially, possibly be nuclear-armed as well?
Well, the Australian government, under Anthony Albanese's leadership, have strenuously denied these will be nuclear-armed submarines. They'll be nuclear-powered, and the idea is, of course, they can stay at sea almost indefinitely if they're nuclear-powered, and they will have all the technology the world can offer, basically, particularly by the 2050s. The view is that Australia needs to have this sort of capability, along with the British and the Americans, as they see it, to send a clear message to the Chinese leadership that their assertiveness has got limits in the Indo-Pacific region. One thing we should mention, Sean, for our listeners, that this deal, the AUKUS deal, was signed in September 2021, and the justification for it was that these 3 countries, these 3 English-speaking countries, believed that it was necessary for this enhanced security arrangement in order to defend, as they put it, the international rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific region, which is a huge region in the world. 60% of the world's population live there, and some of the most dynamic economies, not just China. We often get fixated with China. Japan has the 3rd biggest economy in the world. You've got Vietnam growing about 8 to 9% a year. Other economies on the move, Indonesia and Malaysia. So that is becoming, if you like, the centre of gravity for the world's economy.
Right. We still have our anti-nuclear ships legislation, right? So these Aussie submarines will not be able to come here.
No, we weren't invited.
Though we couldn't tell, they wouldn't be allowed to transit through our economic zone, one imagines. That would be verboten as well.
Yeah, we legislatively, we can't participate in this. We were not invited to participate in it. And it's not just us. We shouldn't forget, Sean, that the 10 members of ASEAN also signed a treaty declaring that part of the world, Southeast Asia, nuclear-free weapon zone. So what the Australians are doing is causing a little bit of controversy, not just for us who are, have a non-nuclear security policy, but also for many countries in the region. And countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, even Singapore have been lukewarm about the idea of Australia having nuclear-powered submarines. They see it, the danger that it may be a trigger for nuclear proliferation in the region.
Does this agreement affect our existing relationship security-wise and intelligence-wise with the United States, Canada, Great Britain and Australia?
Well, Canada's not part of it.
Ah, right, okay.
It's just these three. I don't think so, and there's no indication that's the case. I think New Zealand is still regarded as an important partner. Obviously, the UK, Australia, and the United States are very, very much aware that we have a non-nuclear approach to security. So I don't think it will affect. We're a member of the Five Eyes intelligence sharing arrangement. That will remain unchanged. We're also an informal partner of NATO, which is often overlooked, but it's an important connection for us. And we have very good bilateral relations with both Australia and the United States. So I don't think we will be strategically sidelined in intelligence terms by this development.
Right. Here's a question, though. If we are still part of Five Eyes and there are monitoring and other facilities in New Zealand, and we are providing intelligence or part of an intelligence network that is used to inform the deployment of nuclear submarines, well, we're kind of part of it, aren't we?
Well, that's New Zealand often has had close relations with nuclear-capable actors, and we do share intelligence with the United States, with the UK, with Canada, with Australia. So, it's a fine distinction. But you know what? New Zealand does have a vision of a nuclear-free world, which isn't shared by some of its close allies. We don't have an identical worldview, Sean, to the United States or the UK. For example, they are both permanent members of the Security Council. We would actually, and this has been a long-standing New Zealand position, right from the beginning of the UN, back in the late 40s, early mid-40s, I should say, we've always wanted to see the end of the veto, and that remains the position. So in our sense, our vision of the world going forward is not identical to the United States or the UK, and I think that's one of the reasons successive governments do like the idea of being close but not identical to the United States and also the UK and Australia.
I get you. Let's look at the other, headline-grabbing thing. Nanaia Mahuta goes off to China. Why? What was achieved? Apart from, I guess, keep you out of the headlines on other issues in New Zealand.
Well, I think it was an important visit, a significant visit. China is a very big trade partner for us. 31% of our exports go there. We're not alone in this. I think Australia's proportion of exports that go there is even higher than ours. And in both cases, in Australia and New Zealand, China is our number one export destination. So I think part of the discussion was economics, but I think also it was clear from the announcement made from Nanaia Mahuta's office that there were some other difficult issues raised with the Chinese leadership. Now, you may say, well, we're just a small country. They won't take any notice of us. I'm not quite sure that's the case, because China does tend to make a distinction between New Zealand and some of the other Western countries it trades with. It sees New Zealand as a little bit more independent. And from what we can gather, the foreign minister raised issues like Chinese ambivalence over the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and also how it's hurting China globally, and issues like human rights as well, which is, again, an irritation for the Chinese leadership. They see that as interference in their domestic affairs, whereas we see it quite differently. So I think it was a visit which certainly discussed trade relations between the two countries, but also took stock of the current troubled international situation, and perhaps gave the Chinese leadership a chance to hear a version of events they may not like, but they have to listen to. After all, China's got to superpower status on the basis of being a very successful player in the world capitalist economy, and they can't ignore sentiments within that space.
Yeah, but they're probably far more interested in the meeting they had with Putin, right? Which also, I guess, in terms of geopolitics, was a big deal. I've got to say, from the outside, it looked to me almost as if Putin was asking Big Brother China to just give him a bit of backing because he's in trouble. What was all that about?
Well, that was interesting, wasn't it? There was a lot of symbolism there, but there's not too much signs of substantial support by the Chinese. The Chinese wanted to... the Chinese are conflicted. On the one hand, they do not want the Putin regime to collapse as a result of a defeat in Ukraine. They know that Putin won't survive anything less than some annexation of Ukrainian territory, which, by the way, they probably didn't approve of in the first place, because what Russia is doing is undermining China's foreign policy. China has... its foreign policy is based around the idea of key principles like territorial integrity and sovereignty. That's why it makes its claims to Taiwan and also Hong Kong. Putin's actions are undermining that. So they're conflicted. But the nightmare scenario, of course, is Ukraine with Western backing, seeing off Putin, ejecting the troops or defeating the troops, the Russian troops in that country, Putin collapsing, and that having global reverberations of the Western, orientated liberal democracy world getting the upper hand in what China sees as a global struggle. But China was left in no doubt. If it does arm Putin, both the EU and the United States has told China in the clearest and the starkest terms they will constrain their exports to their two biggest markets. We shouldn't forget this. China exported more than $1,400 billion worth of goods and services to the United States and EU last year. So their position is not invulnerable. And so far, despite all the symbolism of the visit, all the talk about, standing by Russia, very little has transpired. And in my view, the Chinese are fully aware that if they armed the Putin regime, they could very well undermine their own economy, or at least cause it severe problems. And I'm not sure they're prepared to take that step for someone, as you quite rightly characterized, Sean, just now, someone they see as their junior partner.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting situation. The other thing, just as a final point, Sean, which I think many of us have lost sight of, is immediately after that meeting, both China and Russia took steps which undermine each other. First of all, Mr. Putin indicated his willingness to move nuclear weapons into Belarus, something that the Chinese have constantly warned Mr. Putin not to contemplate the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. They said quite publicly there's no circumstances which would justify the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and that's one thing. On the Chinese side, they organized a conference of many of the Central Asian neighbors of Russia, including Kazakhstan and a number of other actors in the region. And that would have been seen as provocative in the Kremlin, because Russia's always seen itself as, if you like, the major player in that region of Central Asia. So there's both of them are paying lip service to being united, but they're also taking steps to try to gain ground on the other, which is very interesting.
Robert, it's always interesting talking to you, and I've been concentrating on other issues, so it is fantastic to bring myself up to date in 20 quick minutes on what's happening in the world. Look, we've got to talk again soon too. We didn't even get to Ukraine and what's been happening there. I thank you greatly for your time this morning, and have a great weekend. That is Robert Patman. Well, he's a professor. He's He's an academic, and he's our guy. He's our go-to guy on foreign affairs. Wasn't that a great rap?